from the Unshackled studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to this Starter Week edition of WilmsFront on this Monday, the 2nd of November 2020. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube and DLive channels, as well as the Unshackled's Facebook page, and as always on the interactive broadcast software Entropy, which I've put the link into the live chat. It is 7 p.m. here in Melbourne, where we had another 0 new case days, so a hat trick of days with no new cases. It was also a third Dan-free day, with the Transport Minister Jacinta Allen giving the coronavirus update, which was great. Next, we're all anticipating following Monday, when the Ring of Steel dividing Melburnians and regional Victorians is due to be brought down and the 25-kilometre travel limit for Melburnians abolished. Despite the consistent low coronavirus numbers, with only 49 active cases and only 2 in hospital, we are still living under a state of disaster, which expires next Monday as well. It obviously should not be renewed, especially when the Emergency Management Commissioner, Andrew Crisp, was spotted yesterday at a Melbourne park picnicking without a mask, which are still mandatory to be worn when you're outside as it stands. It was the state of disaster declared by Premier Dan Andrews on August the 2nd that saw the people of Melbourne subjected to a curfew, confined to their homes from 8 p.m. until 5 a.m. The curfew was removed on September 28th, when a Supreme Court challenge against the curfew brought by Mornington Peninsula cafe owner and Liberal Party member Michelle Laio was starting. Today, the Supreme Court upheld the validity of the curfew, although the court conceded it was a curtailment of human rights. Given the state of the second wave at that time, they decided that it was a proportionate public health measure. Well, many Melburnians are finally feeling a sense of optimism about the future and also the summer to come. On Sky News Australia last night, Peter Credlin's Deadly Decisions Inside Victorian's Hotel Quarantine Catastrophe documentary reminded us of the trauma we have been through in these past 4 months during this second lockdown, and how the second wave could have been prevented if there was a more professional chain of command at the quarantine hotels, if the Australian Defence Force or Victoria Police were present, and it was not just left up to private security guards and their subcontractors. Peter Credlin's investigative work into who made the decision to hire Unified Security, led by David Millward, awarding them a $30 million contract for the hotel quarantine, has put the Board of Inquiry into Victoria's hotel quarantine program, chaired by former Family Court Judge Jennifer Coate, to shame. So much so that they've asked for more time to gather further evidence and affidavits, and hopefully to call more witnesses back for cross-examination. The inquiry will publish an interim report this Friday, the 6th of November, which was supposed to be its final reporting date, and the full report will be handed down on the 21st of December, 4 days before Christmas. On the 1st of July this year, new industrial manslaughter laws came into force in Victoria that were passed by the Andrews government through the Parliament at the end of 2019. The offence carries a maximum fine of $16.5 million for employers, and jail terms of up to 20 years, and fines of up to $1.65 million for individuals whose actions or omissions cause the death of a worker or member of the public and involve a breach of an OHS duty through negligence. There have been calls for Victoria's industrial manslaughter laws to be applied against those responsible for setting up and administering the hotel quarantine program, with breaches from the program genomically traced to the second wave infections, which has claimed 800 lives. My guest tonight is Ken Phillips. He's the Director of Self-Employed Australia. He has wrote on the 29th of September to WorkSafe Victoria's Enforcement Director, requesting that they begin prosecuting proceedings. Ken, welcome to the show.
How are you, Tim?
Oh, well, I think I'm like most Melburnians, doing better. We have some hope now. I remember early August when we had that state of disaster. We were waking up every morning to, was it 400, 600, 700 cases? It was almost just like there was no hope. I'm not sure about when you were watching the Peter Credlin's documentary last night, but it was sort of like, as I said, reliving the grief of that lockdown experience again.
And I think a lot of people are going to want to move on, put it behind them and forget it. And I think politically that's more than likely what the Andrews government is betting on. There's an election in 2 years' time, and they hope that all this will be well and truly forgotten.
And I'm like the rest of Melburnians. I want to forget. I don't basically want to keep reliving the trauma, but we don't want the people responsible for this preventable second wave to get away with it. And this is what the action that you've taken with this letter, which I'll put up on the screen. You sent it to WorkSafe Victoria Director Gordon Cooper on September 29th. Have you heard back from him?
Yes, we have, and they have confirmed and said to us that they are investigating, and that's as far as it goes. They have a statute requirement to reply to us by the 29th of December, and they have to then tell us if they are prosecuting, or if they're not prosecuting, why not. And then if they don't prosecute, we are then able to write to the public prosecutor requesting that the public prosecutor undertake prosecution. So there's a series of steps to unfold here.
Now, explain how these industrial manslaughter laws were designed to be applied to workplaces and companies, because Daniel Andrews, he was quite keen to champion this as a proud Labor Union achievement. And as you wrote yourself, he didn't expect that his government would be first in the firing line for these laws to be applied.
Well, let's be specific on what act's being applied and where it is and so forth. The amendment, the industrial manslaughter laws are amendments to the Victorian Occupational Health and Safety Act of 2004. So whether or not the manslaughter issues are there or not, there is still a process requiring prosecution under the 2004 Act. Now, that Act was the creature of the Bracks Labor government. I consider that Act to be a very good piece of legislation. In actual fact, I consider it to be possibly the best piece of OHS legislation in the country. In my view, it has been quite corrupted by the manslaughter legislation, but let's remember what's actually being applied here is at first base the 2004 Act. Now, that Act requires that, and I'll put it in more generic terms than an employer, that an entity is required to conduct a safe worksite. The idea of a worksite has a very broad definition. So, for example, if you were walking through a shopping centre and there was a shop being renovated and a live electric wire fell across the outside of the shop and you stood on it and were electrocuted, the very fact that you're outside the shop doesn't absolve the people who are renovating the shop from their obligations. And so that's the way it should be. So
yeah, I agree as well.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the way it should be. So what we've got is a situation here with the Victorian government, with the health department. I liken it to a situation preparing for war. And effectively, that's what we're in. We've got this silent thing that we're at war with. And we spend a huge amount of money on the military to try and ensure that if we are attacked as a nation, that we are in a position to defend ourselves. And we're well and truly, we hope, prepared for that. And we do assessments all the time of what's going on. And the health department in this area is very much like our military forces. These pandemics are not something that is unknown. Since the year 2000, there have been a repeat of these sorts of things, SARS and so on and so forth. The communicable diseases are a known issue. So AIDS, HIV, all sexually transmitted diseases and all the other things, whooping cough, on and on it goes. And the health department is charged with a primary responsibility to be alert to all of this, to be prepared for it, to respond. And that's what we pay an enormous amount of money asking them to do. Not asking them to do, requiring them to do. So the arrival of this germ from overseas was not something that was unusual, not something that was unexpected. It falls within all of the parameters of what we know about viruses and germs. It's a new one, but big deal. And we knew it was coming. It was in China. We had the federal government repatriating people from Wuhan and putting them into isolation beforehand. So it was clear that the risks and the situation was well known. It was well known how this needed to be handled. We had the situation with the Ruby Princess where it was handled badly. So we knew if it wasn't handled correctly that there would be a breakout. We knew about the ship in Western Australia where there was a similar problem. And so the health department in Victoria had absolute knowledge, months of knowledge about what was coming. And they are supposed to be prepared. So to say that this is something unusual or outside of what we understood or that there was some mistakes made, rubbish. Complete and total rubbish. So these people were in charge of this defence. They knew what had to be done. And they did not make mistakes. They fouled up totally and completely and continued to foul up. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a series of foul-ups built on top of each other that kept building and building and building, not just for weeks, but for months, before they finally started to react. Now they're turning around and saying, oh, look, let's put that all in the past. Let's forget about it. It was a series of mistakes. Well, I'm sorry, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, these are not acceptable excuses. They were in charge. They said that they were in charge. They recognised that they were in charge. And to turn around and say en masse, oh, we didn't know what happened. Well, in a court of law, in any other situation, the WorkSafe Authority would have moved in like a battering ram, and they would have investigated from day one. And in my view, prosecutions would be on the go at the moment.
We've seen with the board of inquiry into the hotel quarantine program, this you've just described that it should be the sole responsibility health department, but we've seen it basically there's been this cross department where they've all been able to basically run cover for each other. That's what it looks, because it's there's Health and Human Services where Jenny Mikakos was the minister responsible. Then the Department of Jobs in charge of procurement, headed by Minister Martin Pakula, and then of course the enforcement side, Lisa Neville as the Police and Emergency Management Minister, and now we have the hotel quarantine program in Victoria. It's not receiving international travellers at the moment, but those who can't isolate at home, that's now run by Attorney General Jill Hennessy's department. So we have this huge web now, which it makes the job of WorkSafe Victoria. I mean, where do you start to sort of? We've seen how the hotel quarantine inquiry hasn't got very far. Where should they start?
at the beginning, day one, that Credlin has pointed out in her things, that's on the public record. Who made the decision to not use the police or the army and start from there? Any good investigative journalist is able to follow the rabbits down the burrow. And we've seen here with the Kate inquiry, a complete failure to follow leads of inquiry. This is what they should be doing. So we've written to the Kate inquiry ourselves. There were a series of emails that are in the evidence in which people who were organising the quarantine were expressing extreme frustration at the performance of one of the security companies. And they said in the emails exchange, but we have to keep using them because of trades, being Trades Hall Council. Now, if that's not a trigger to go and investigate what went on at Trades Hall Council to cause those people in the government to say we're being required to use Trades Hall Council, we're required to use these people because of Trades Hall Council, that should be signalling red flags everywhere. There should be a deep dive inquiry into just that area of investigation. So this has been created as such a complex sequence of events of people denying knowledge of what decisions were made and when, from the Premier through everyone. We have no idea. I'm sorry, the WorkSafe Authority, if this had been a building that had blown up and killed 800 people and had been on fire for as many months as COVID had been out there would be deep dive investigations into every specific detail of what went on, when, how decisions were made, exactly what happened. There is a responsibility under the Act to provide a safe system of work. It is completely demonstrable that this failed on a monumental scale. This was not a safe system of work, and the safe system of work continued to be unsafe for a very considerable period of time and to the extent where the government admitted they could not control the situation, and so therefore they put us all into this big lockdown. Every day of that lockdown was an admission by the government of failure of safe work systems. And we don't yet have the WorkSafe Authority prosecuting. So where do you start? You start at the beginning and you just keep working on it. Remember, these are criminal prosecutions. You know, it's the same situation. You get a murder mystery. Several people have been murdered in a house. We don't know what went on. Where do the forensic analysts go? They start at the beginning and they work through each piece of forensic information and they gather it all together until they can form a picture. There is a picture to be formed here as to why the decisions were made, how they were made, and what the breakdown in the systems of work were, and who is responsible, all the people and the departments and the entities that are responsible for that. There is a picture, there is a story to be told, and it has to be brought out, because if you don't bring this out, this will be repeated. That's the issue.
And we've heard Daniel Andrews say by next month that he wants to resume international arrivals, and we'll wait to see the interim report on Friday. What that says from Justice Coate. You would hope that there's going to be more scrutiny on the program this time from the media than there was last time, but nobody could have guessed how, as you said, things compounded. It was not just the first there was the breaches in the program, but then of course we've seen the poor contact tracing as well, not using a digitized system. But obviously, as if this was happening in a private company, the book would be thrown at them. But the thing, and this is not unique to the Andrews government, but governments constantly get away with doing things of malpractice that would see a private company go into liquidation, and this is another. This problem is here as well.
Well, we can't accept that as an excuse.
Oh, I'm not, but I'm just saying that this has always been.
I know you're not, but we as a community can't accept that as an excuse. We have to have a if we had a foreign power invade Australia, a mythical foreign power, and crash in and start bombing Sydney and Melbourne and everywhere else, the generals who didn't foresee this and who didn't have things in place to stop it would be sacked very quickly. You cannot accept this from a government. There cannot be one rule for the ruled and another rule for the rulers. That's not a democracy. That's not a civilized society. That is a dictatorship under any name. And it is the folly of humans when we organise as a society to have a situation where people who obtain power work towards a situation where they are not responsible for their actions. Now, fortunately, we've got some situations operating in the reverse. We had the scandal with the cessation of the live meat trade into Indonesia, and the court ruling that held the government responsible. And it's fantastic to see the government standing up to its responsibilities and accepting that. And the standard that we have to have in our society is that no one is immune from the law. If any one of the responsible officers or ministers or anyone had been in a bus, driving a bus with a whole lot of school kids in the back and had crashed the bus and killed a whole lot of the school kids, we'd be screaming for blood and they'd be prosecuted. There is no difference. There is no difference.
As we come out of this lockdown now, there are a lot of lawsuits pending against the lockdown. I just mentioned in my introduction the challenge to the curfew knocked back by the Supreme Court. We have a High Court challenge to the 5 kilometre radius that's being heard later this month. There's also Jim Penman of Jim's mowing his class action as well, and there's a whole bunch of other ones as well. Obviously, your request, well, it's not a legal action, but it's something that you want WorkSafe to look at. Obviously, with the decision today, it ruled in favour of the government. That's my feeling, is that most of the time, especially the courts in Victoria and the authorities in Victoria, are always going to rule with either the government or the police. I mean, we saw with the George Pell prosecution and conviction, it took the High Court to overturn that. So do you still have confidence that what you're pursuing through WorkSafe will get somewhere, given what we've seen as the state of justice in Victoria?
Major concern. Even if you put the Pell case aside, there are a number of OHS prosecutions that occurred in Victoria where the parties prosecuted, the businesses prosecuted, were demonstrably not even involved in the incidents, were prosecuted, convicted, found guilty in the full bench of the Supreme Court, and like the Pell case, was overturned totally at the High Court. There is seems to me a process that occurs too often, and this is well documented by lawyers, where it looks like the system of justice could be even identified as a system of winks and nudges, that someone goes down not because of what they did or did not do, but because of who they are or whose nose they've got out of joint. Conversely, people who should be prosecuted seem to be in the right camps and are left alone. So I'm of the view that we have got a considerable problem in Victoria. The system of justice is of enormous concern, and the only power that we the people have is to get out there and talk about it, and ultimately to consider what we do with our votes.
Do you think these industrial manslaughter laws and the possible prosecution that Andrew's government and bureaucrats could face, do you think that's genuinely concerning him and has influenced his decision to basically go for an elimination strategy, which looks like it's going to get there if the numbers keep getting to zero, and he's been so you would say stubborn in saying that we've got to just the memes have all been, oh, we've just got to have a few more weeks, shut down for a bit longer, and that. What's your thoughts on how much that is playing on his mind?
Well, I'm actually probably a contrarian on this from what you would think, and my view is that unfortunately the lockdown was required. It was required because of the complete and total failure of the systems of government. And they have to be held responsible for that. But effectively, what the government did was admit that they had total failure. And so therefore, the only option that they had was to lock us all in our rooms like naughty school children. Now then, when they applied that, they applied it in a completely inconsistent manner. And so we find that we had gyms mowing people, for example, independent contractors banned from working. But you could walk into any one of the gardens in the city and find council employee gardeners merrily doing their job. We find we're all in this together theme. Well, no, we're not in all this together. The small businesses and and particularly retail and hospitality crashed into nothingness. And yet they turn around and they give all the public servants a 2% pay rise. So what we've got here is a process of dividing the society, an intentional process of dividing society. In other words, the pain, the financial pain, the emotional pain, and the psychological pain has been suffered by one specific sector of society. People in business for themselves, employees, workers, the public service, all the unions, protected entities. So what we've got here is a lockdown because of the failure of the government, a government that made us all unsafe, that then locked us in our rooms like little children, told us to behave and that we were being naughty. The people who were being naughty all the time was the government itself. What we've got in play here is the politics of Stockholm syndrome, where the people who have been locked up feel empathy and sympathy and are grateful to the people who locked them up because they're now keeping us safe. But what we have to remember here is that we were unsafe because of the unsafe behaviours of the government itself. So was the lockdown necessary? Unfortunately, yes. But because of the failures and the unsafe practices of the government. That's why the OHS prosecution has to proceed.
Well, we are the only state or territory in Australia to experience a second wave. And going back to what you said, remember Dan lecturing and hectoring us. He tried to blame the spike in cases in June on families getting together and people not following the rules. Well, we know where the spike came from now, but you're absolutely right about the inconsistency of the industry restrictions when it came to stage 4. Construction was hardly touched, and even though John Setka is head of the secretary of the CFMEU in Victoria, influential, and just to take a isolated example, when Dan introduced the fitted face mask requirement, there was a last minute change which allowed the gaiters which the construction workers wear, who lobbied for that last minute change.
Well, the whole thing's just riddled with inconsistencies, and the whole thing's riddled with unfairness. And really the point that the people have to remember, and we just keep coming back to this the whole time, it was the unsafe practices of the government that put us all at risk, that created a safety issue for all of us. Their only response was to lock us all down. And every day that we were locked down was a demonstration that these people couldn't cope. It was a further demonstration that these people in the government need to be prosecuted. So that's where we stand, and that's where we have to move forward. Let us hope that, and on Peter Credlin's expose the other night, there were people who referred to the government's mistakes. Let us hope that they have learnt from their mistakes. Well, these weren't mistakes. These were conscious decisions made about how they would manage or mismanage the hotel quarantine and subsequent processes. These weren't mistakes. These people were making conscious decisions on a consistent basis about how they would manage this situation. I don't think it's mistakes. Let us hope that they have stopped mismanaging. When one looks at the press conferences that are going on, you can see, I think, a subtle shift in who might seem to be in control now. There seem to be other people who have taken control, even though they may not officially have taken control. So let us hope that they are on top of the contact tracing. Let us hope that they've got this stuff under control now, and that they do have proper management systems in place. So pray, I'd have to say. Pray.
Well, we've seen on the bureaucracy side, Annalise Van Diemen, who was the Deputy Chief Health Officer, she was moved sideways and is now doing other work. And so Alan Chang is the new Deputy Chief Health Officer. He doesn't seem to have any baggage from anywhere, and we see on we have seen on the daily press conferences the new contact tracing head Jerome Weimer go into detail about what they do, and as you were saying, obviously they coordinated these press conferences to project more competence.
Well, I think there is some hope that competence is there. I get information like a lot of us do. I get information about what's going on, right? Information leaks to me. The contact trace, the testing seems to be up to scratch. They now are getting the test results within a matter of, I believe, 48 hours. Remember, we had a situation in which people were being tested and they were not getting results for 7 days. They were not getting contacted for 7 days. So imagine if you've had a test and you're sitting at home in some sort of lockdown situation and waiting for a result. You don't get a phone call. And so therefore you go, well, maybe I'm okay. I don't know. I've got to go and get food, right? So out you go. And that sort of mismanagement, gross mismanagement of what should have been pretty basic stuff, seems to have stopped. So it seems that people are getting contacted very quickly, being told what's going on. But the little incident that we had, just a week or a couple of weeks ago, where the Muslim family, where there's went out and the kids are sent back to school, and I think a Somali family, and the health department and the government were essentially blaming the family. And yet there was a big expose in The Age explaining exactly what happened, and it was completely clear that the health department had fouled up the communication with the family. The family received communication from the department that made it quite clear, anyone would have taken it, that was quite clear for the kids to go back to school, and the health department fouled it up again. That was just, 2 weeks ago? Now, that seems to have been the last incident, but there will be incidents again. So here's going to be the real test. There will be some situations that crop up, and how quickly will the health department get on top of those and manage them properly and isolate the situation properly? So the tests are still to come. It's inevitable that there will be some breakouts. I think we can all hope that after, how many months are we now on this? Is it 6 months or more?
I think we're into 7 months of this pandemic in Australia and various levels of lockdowns and restrictions.
So let us hope that they have finally got themselves organised to a level equivalent to the other states.
Well, we saw in that when the second wave was beginning to spike and they set up those mass drive-in testing clinics at the shopping centres, there was no clear instructions that once you get tested with symptoms, you need to isolate, because, for example, people were getting tested at Chadstone Shopping Centre during the drive-through and then going into shop.
And look, I'm well aware. I was involved in managing some situations at some factories, and there was a factory in which I was involved in the management processes around a breakout, very small breakout. It was one person, but the factory had to be closed down. We were immediately talking to the workers at the factory and saying, look, go and get tested straight away. And so when they went to get tested, the people who had been in immediate contact with the person who had COVID were tested. But if you hadn't been in immediate contact but had been in the factory, the health department refused to test them. And they came back to us and we said, go to another health centre and go, I've got a cold, and then you'll get tested. So testing of people who were in an immediate environment were being refused. This was just incompetence. You know, this a 12-year-old primary school girl would have been able to tell you how to run this better, right? Because they would have simply applied common sense. And so this was just monumental failures, which reflected some sort of really weird, very, very weird management thinking inside the Department of Health. Goodness knows what it was, but jeepers, we have to get to the bottom of that. We are in an unsafe situation if we allow the lack of knowledge of this to continue. The only way to create safety for the community is to find out what went on. You only do that by undertaking prosecutions, and then you have the learning experience.
There's still the I stand with Dan people, and they're also called the Dan droids, who I know that they one of their defenses of Dan, oh, could you do a better job? Or you just said with that testing situation, a 12-year-old schoolgirl could do better. And so my response always to these people has been, yes, I could do a better job.
Well, look, there are the groups of trolls, and on our Facebook page and so forth, we've had a fair sway of these trolls come in, and let's just call them political operatives, right? People who are scared that there will be a political fallout from this and the Labor Party will fall and so on and so forth. So put all of those people to one side, right? They're just playing political games. But then take this very large group of people who genuinely say Dan did a good job. They're not politically motivated. They're looking at the situation and say he did a good job. And in a lot of respects, I'll come back to the point before, these people are caught up in the Stockholm syndrome, because the politicised version of Stockholm syndrome, because what they're saying is there was a complete failure. He had to lock us down to stop it. Yes, he did do that. So therefore, it's worthwhile supporting him on that. And I'd agree with them. I think they're being perfectly rational. They're being perfect. You've got to take out all the political operatives out of this. But that very large groups of people who say, look, he did a good job by locking us all down and we eventually got rid of the thing, or we hope we've got rid of the thing. And they're quite correct, absolutely correct. But then on the other side, if those same people don't turn around and say, oh, yes, but the problem, the unsafetiness of it was caused by this government, and we have to get to the bottom of this and find out who and why, well, they are doing themselves a disservice, because what they are doing is enabling the state to stay in a very unsafe, uncertain situation, and we can't afford to continue that. So I'll divide those, protect Dan sort of people into those two categories. Just the political operatives, and good, just go and do your political job. And then the other group, which I think is very large, who are genuine and they are correct, but they've also got to see the correctness of making sure that we prosecute, we find out the truth.
Obviously, well, Peter Credlin has been leading at the scrutiny of how this unified security company got this $30 million contract in one day, and it wasn't on the government's approved tender list. We're getting the broader, more informed public are getting an idea that this sort of inconsistency, if I put it in the mildest form, this irregularity is not unique, given that what we've heard in the IBAC hearings in the past week about the kickbacks in the Metro and V-Line train outsourcing and contracts, which is that the handing over of money and cash, that's like straight out of a movie. It's breathtaking.
If it looks like corruption, smells like corruption, it probably is corruption. And to my mind, I have great clarity on how the decision was made. And it was made through a corrupt process. And in my view, this corrupt process is endemic in this government, that the checks and balances around contract decision-making have been corrupted extensively. And I think that the cover-up that's occurring, the we don't know, we can't explain it, is a process of trying to avoid the truth around a very corrupt process and a very corrupt situation deeply in the heart of the Victorian government. And it's going to take quite a while for this to be uncovered. And there will be constant processes to try and avoid and stop the truth coming out. And those processes to stop the truth will come from some of the most powerful institutions in this state.
Well, one of the new bits of information from Peter Credlin's documentary last night was one of the subcontractors, Andrew McLean from Elite Protection Services, describing what was referred to as the hot hotel ridges on Swanston Street and the special treatment that the Cedar Meats positive cases were allowed, that they couldn't call the police if the Cedar Meats positive cases went walkabouts. And when he started to ask questions and that, there was a sexual harassment charge levied against his company. And then in late May, his subcontract was terminated, which is obviously because he was, as you were pointing out, he was highlighting mistakes and inconsistencies, but they weren't acted upon. In fact, he was shafted.
Well, these weren't mistakes and inconsistencies. Well, they were inconsistencies, but they weren't mistakes. Given the evidence that he gave the other night, these were deliberate decisions. Now, once again, you get a situation like that. If it looks like corruption and it smells like corruption, it probably is corruption. I think the word corruption is written all over this stuff. We've got to face up to reality, and the cover up is on in a huge way.
Obviously, we've seen the Melbourne press pack for most of the year be pretty mediocre, to put it lightly. It's taken a non-journalist, Peter Credlin, to start digging, but we saw our own anti-corruption body, IBAC. They're starting to, you would say, put the foot down in holding public hearings. But obviously, the media plays a big role in scrutinising and bringing attention to the other areas of corruption and the awarding of these contracts. So my other question to you in this regard: do you have faith that the media can do a better job going forward in properly scrutinising this government and other contracts that it's given out to connected people?
Look, if we don't have, in an open democratic society, a robust media that drives for the truth irregardless of the consequences, we have a very weak society. Now, in Australia, we had the breaking open of the scandals to do with the banks happened because of superb journalistic endeavours and the exposure. The underpayment rorting that was occurring of workers, that happened because of a stunningly good journalistic investigation. And so we have a culture of journalism in this country that does drive for the truth. When the journalistic culture turns around and starts to back off because it's dealing with a particular government, and I don't care whether the government is a socialist, an extreme right wing, a middle of the road, doesn't matter, right? But when you have a media that doesn't robustly chase the truth on an issue like this, when we saw them chase the truth with the banks and underpayment and so forth, well, the media or journalists in it are starting to default to acceptance of an unsafe society. And whatever their political affiliations might be, they have a higher calling both to their profession, to their own careers, but to the hope that we in society hold out for good quality journalists. So I hope that they step up to the mark, and I know lots of journalists, and I think ultimately they will. The truth on this is this is a long haul, a long haul. There was 2 years between the Watergate break-in and Nixon resigning. It was 2 years. And in the middle of all of that, he handsomely won an election while the storm was brewing. So this is big, and none of us should expect this expose and the truth to come out easily. It will be extracted very, very painfully from the people who have a vested interest in keeping the truth hidden.
Yes, I agree. It's been a very slow process just to get into the 24 hour, to know that it was 24 hours when the security contract was awarded. There's still a long way to go to how the decision was ultimately made. Now, the people that you represent at Self-Employed Australia, they're slowly being allowed to get back to work now, but as you yourself said, they've been clearly discriminated against during the second lockdown. It's been a mixture of the aid to businesses that have been forced to shut down, a mixture of federal and state aid. Obviously, the federal government has a JobKeeper. We saw when people weren't isolating when they got tested, Dan introduced the $300 payment. Now it's $450 payment for isolating while you're waiting for your test, and $1,500 payment when you're quarantining. I mentioned Jim Penman's lawsuit. Do you think that there is a legitimate legal case for people that you represent and the people that Jim Penman represents to seek compensation for that discrimination?
Look, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't make I wouldn't dare pass a view on the legalities of it. But on the pub test, there seems to be inordinately strong reasons for people to proceed. We come back to the basic facts. The basic facts are that this was caused by the government. And that's not an accusation. That's based on the admissions of the government and all the representatives of the government themselves in the Code inquiry. They've admitted that. So stand up to your responsibilities, people. The litigation shouldn't have to occur. This should be the government saying, we're opening up a fund. We are going to compensate you properly. You come to us and we will give you, this is like when the churches were finally caught out on the sexual abuse issues. And the big criticisms of the churches is that the compensation processes they put in place were a sham and then a cover up and all that sort of stuff. That was a whole series of criticisms around that. But really, this government's subject to those same criticisms as well. People should not have to go through the process of going to court to seek compensation when they have been clearly abused. These people have been abused. And I've really been quite surprised over the last couple of weeks with some business people that I know in our network and talk to on sort of every now and again, and people who are very, very good quality business people who know how to get stuck into it and do the job and so forth, and are entrepreneurs and so forth, have said to me they're suffering from the black dog. This is, and you sort of go, oh, what? And to get that comment from one and then get it from another and then get it another and another, people have seriously sort of opened up by the fact that they are being treated for depression. These are adult business people. It's pretty serious stuff. Goodness gracious. Oh yeah, the compensation programs, the compensation litigation program will unfold. The government will continue to resist. They'll put up defences. They'll do all this sort of stuff, and they'll go on and on and on and on. And if they were really honest government, they would say, we're going to start to look after people properly. Now, the unfortunate thing of all of this, could bankrupt the state, because the damage has been so extensive as a result of the failures of the government, as a result of the decisions of the government that were unsafe practices, the compensation should be huge.
Well, I've got the state budget coming up November 24th. That'll probably be quite confronting to say the least. The black hole that, well, it was already brewing because of all the cost blowouts in their various infrastructure projects, such as the Westgate Tunnel, and there's a few others the Metro Tunnel as well. The cost blowouts on that as well. So it's going to be a grim budget, and yeah, the real pain, both economic and mental, as you just mentioned, that'll still unfold for not just the next few months, but many years.
We've got a long haul on this one, a very long haul.
Well, thank you so much, Ken, for providing your expertise and insight. The audience has thoroughly enjoyed it, as have I, and I'm eager to see what action WorkSafe take by. So you said December 19th is when they have to make a decision?
29th of December.
29th of September, so after Christmas.
We've got a series of things that we're going to do in preparation for that.
Well, I'm sure you'll keep us informed about that. Well, you've got your website, and you're write regularly for the Spectator, and so I'm sure we'll hear an update from you about that.
For sure. Good.
Well, take care, Ken, and my best wishes to the people you represent as well. I'm glad they've been able to get back to work.
Thanks for your time.
All right, I'll end the show by providing a update on the other significant news developments. Obviously, we had the WilmsFront election night live stream for the Queensland state election. Anastasia Palaszczuk won a third term convincingly. Now that Queensland has fixed 4-year terms, she'll be there until October 2024 if she chooses to serve out a full term. Deb Frecklington, the LNP opposition leader, she bizarrely gave her concession speech at the same time Anastasia Palaszczuk gave her victory speech. It was extremely uncoordinated. There was obviously no phone call where the loser concedes, they make a speech, and then the winner makes their victory speech. Deb Frecklington on Saturday night said she was staying on. But then today has said she will not recontest the leadership when it comes up for a vote in the parting room. Obviously, during the course of the election night, I described Deb Frecklington as low energy Deb, very mediocre. She doesn't have a very she just has this unconvincing motherly persona, and she even had that today. And there was no way that she could stay on, given that Anastasia Palaszczuk clearly had a much better pulse for the people, much better cult of personality as a leader. And well, she was once described as the accidental premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, when she won surprisingly in 2015, reversed the LNP landslide of 2012. But it's always the politicians you underestimate who end up becoming the most successful. For example, when Tony Abbott was elected leader of the opposition, Liberal leader in 2009, he was described as unelectable. And yet he almost brought down the Labor government after one term and then won landslide in 2013. US election is in its final stages now. Trump has done 5 rallies today in 5 states. Every time I turn on the news, there's a Trump rally. I'm getting overloaded with Trump rallies now. I'm at the stage now where I just want the election to happen now. There's talk about the gap closing in the key swing states, which are Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, even Minnesota. Trump won't win the popular vote, but he can still win the Electoral College, which is what matters. The Unshackled will be covering the results as they come in. They'll come in on Wednesday, the 4th of November, not tomorrow, which is the actual election day, given the time difference. So from midday, Wednesday, November 4th, that's when the Unshackled coverage will begin. Tomorrow in Australian time is Melbourne Cup Day, but there'll be no crowds because of the still existing coronavirus restrictions, which is a shame because it's going to be 28 degrees. It would have been a beautiful Melbourne Cup Day if it was any normal year, given that, well, this is Melbourne. It has rained on Cup days and the marquees have blown over, but it would have been an absolutely superb Cup Day tomorrow, which everyone would have been able to bask in the sun if it was a normal year. But sadly, it isn't. Because it is a public holiday tomorrow, there is another Freedom Day rally happening at Parliament House at midday. It'll be interesting to see what the Victoria Police response is. We haven't heard in the lead up to this from Assistant Commissioner Luke Cornelius, aka Chief Wiggum, about what the police response is going to be. There is still that public gathering limit of 10 people, but now it can be from any household, not just 2 households, but the 25-kilometre radius still applies. So we'll see how Victoria Police react tomorrow, and also how they're dressed. Are they just going to be dressed normally in their blue and high-vis yellow, or are they the public order response unit in the red and with those basically body armor suits? Are they going to be there as well? We shall see. As I mentioned, there's still that High Court challenge to Victoria's restriction on the freedom of movement. And we've also got Clive Palmer's challenge to WA's hard border coming up this month as well, which is, well, that could have had a impact on WA Premier Mark McGowan's decision to relax the hard border to a controlled border from November 14th, where anybody apart from Victoria and New South Wales will be able to travel into WA without having to quarantine. People from Victoria and New South Wales can still go into WA, but they have to undergo 14 days quarantine and have to get tested on day 11. Still no timeline on when the Victoria-New South Wales border will be open. Gladys Berejiklian today said it would be a matter of weeks, not months, given that she's still criticising Anastasia Palaszczuk for keeping the Queensland border now shut to Sydney-siders until at least the beginning of December. Gladys would be a hypocrite if she keeps the Victorian border open when she's trying to lobby for the Queensland border to be open. Now, as I mentioned, we've had 3 days in a row of 0 cases and 3 days in a row without Dan Andrews. So fingers crossed tomorrow is another COVID and Dan-free day. I hope that you can enjoy the Melbourne Cup as much as you can, wherever you are in Australia, and hopefully we can have a summer sport a carnival or festivities as normal as possible, we've had two days nationwide with no new coronavirus cases. But obviously our sympathies are with people in the Northern Hemisphere, with England going back into a 4-week national lockdown, and then of course there being the various lockdowns in Wales, Scotland, France, Germany. So our sympathies and solidarity with them, given that, well, what I've been through as a Melburnian. So all the best, everyone. I'll see you midday on Wednesday for the Unshackled US election live stream. I'll see you then.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting the Unshackled.net to view all our shows. And to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.